The Library of Dreams. In the heart of a quiet, forgotten town, hidden between two narrow streets where few ventured, stood an ancient building most people never noticed. Its windows were covered in dust, and its wooden sign, worn and faded from years of neglect, bore the words, "The Library of Dreams." The letters, barely legible, seemed to glow faintly at night, beckoning those who passed by. Few ever entered, and even fewer spoke of what they found inside. Emma was one of those few. She was a curious young woman, the kind who believed that every place, no matter how small or obscure, had a story waiting to be discovered. On a particularly rainy evening, she found herself wandering down a street she'd never seen before. The weather was miserable, and the dark clouds overhead seemed to weigh down the world. Seeking shelter, Emma spotted the dim light from the library and was drawn to it. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a space that looked as old as time itself. Inside, the scent of ancient books filled her senses, a mix of musty paper, polished wood, and the faint sweetness of leather-bound volumes. The library was enormous, far larger than it appeared from the outside. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with books of every imaginable kind. The air was thick with a sense of history, as though every story ever written resided within these walls. Behind the front desk sat an elderly librarian. His hair was white, and his eyes, though old, sparkled with the energy of someone who had seen more than any one person should. He smiled kindly at Emma, his hands resting on a book that seemed to hum with a soft, almost imperceptible glow. "Welcome," he said in a voice that was both warm and mysterious. "You found yourself in a special place." Emma smiled back, though she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. "Thank you," she replied, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet space. "I didn't even know this place existed." "Most don't," the librarian said with a knowing nod. "But those who need it always find it." Emma's curiosity piqued. She had always loved stories, always believed that books held more than just words, and this place, with its towering shelves and endless aisles, seemed to promise something more, something beyond the ordinary. Without another word, she began to wander the aisles. Each row was filled with books of all shapes and sizes, some bound in soft leather, others in cloth, and still others encased in gold or silver with intricate designs. Some books had titles in languages she recognized, while others were written in scripts and symbols that felt ancient and otherworldly. As she moved deeper into the library, Emma noticed something strange. The further she went, the more the air seemed to hum with energy, as if the stories themselves were alive. It was then that she came across a book unlike any other she had ever seen. It sat alone on a pedestal, its cover glowing faintly in the dim light. The title, written in shimmering gold, read, "The Adventures Await." Emma couldn't resist. She reached out and touched the cover, feeling a pulse of warmth beneath her fingers. Her heart raced with excitement and a slight hint of fear as she opened the book. The pages were blank at first, but as she stared at them, words began to appear, swirling and shifting until they formed sentences and then paragraphs. The ink seemed to dance across the page, pulling her in. Before she knew it, the room around her began to change. The wooden shelves, the flickering candles, even the quiet rustle of the librarian behind the desk all faded into a blur. Emma felt a rush of wind, as though she were being pulled through a tunnel, and when she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the library. She was inside the story. The world around her had transformed into a lush, vibrant forest. The trees towered above her, their leaves shimmering in shades of emerald and gold. The ground beneath her feet was soft, covered in moss and flowers that seemed to glow with an inner light. Birds with feathers like jewels flitted between the branches, singing songs that were both haunting and beautiful. Emma looked down at herself and gasped. She was no longer wearing her simple jeans and sweater. Instead, she was dressed in a flowing gown of deep green, embroidered with silver thread. A leather satchel hung at her side, and she could feel the weight of a sword strapped to her back. She had become the protagonist of the story. For a moment, she stood in stunned silence, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But there was no denying the truth. She had been transported into the world of the book. As Emma began to explore her surroundings, she realized that this world was far more than just a setting for a story. It was alive. The trees whispered secrets to one another. The rivers sparkled with magic, and the creatures she encountered spoke in voices that were both familiar and strange. She met talking animals with wisdom far beyond their years, mischievous fairies that played tricks on her, and an ancient tree that guided her path with cryptic advice. But as beautiful as this world was, it wasn't without danger. Emma soon learned that not all stories were filled with joy and wonder. Darkness lurked at the edges of the forest, and with it came the shadow of a great evil, a force that threatened to consume everything she had come to love in this new world. Her journey took her to forgotten ruins, enchanted castles, and deep caverns where the very air crackled with magic. Along the way, she faced trials that tested not only her strength and courage, but also her heart. She made friends and allies, but also enemies who sought to stop her at every turn. The plot twisted and turned, with each chapter bringing new challenges. Emma quickly realized that the only way to return to the library was to finish the story. She had to see it through to the end, no matter how perilous the journey became. In the final act of the story, Emma found herself standing before a massive, fire-breathing dragon, its scales gleaming like molten metal. The dragon guarded the treasure she needed to complete her quest, and there was no way around it. With her sword in hand and the weight of her adventure on her shoulders, Emma faced the beast. The battle was fierce, and for a moment, it seemed as though the dragon would win. But with a final, desperate strike, Emma brought the creature down. As the dragon collapsed, its body disintegrated into a cloud of shimmering dust, and the treasure she sought appeared before her. With the treasure in hand, the world around her began to shimmer and fade. Emma felt the rush of wind again, and before she knew it, she was standing back in the library, the book closed in her hands. The old librarian was waiting for her, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Quite the journey, wasn't it? Emma, still catching her breath, nodded. How is this possible? She asked, looking down at the book in awe. The librarian smiled, his voice soft and mysterious. This is no ordinary library. Here, stories do not simply live on the page. They become real for those brave enough to open the books. Every reader finds the adventure meant for them, but beware, not all tales are as easy as they seem. Emma glanced back at the shelves, where countless books awaited. Each one held a new world, a new adventure, and she knew she had only scratched the surface. There were endless stories waiting to be lived. As she left the library that evening, Emma couldn't help but smile. The Library of Dreams was a place where the impossible became possible, where every book was a door to another world. And she knew, without a doubt, that she would return.